I woke up feeling like maybe no one appreciates me because the internet is just too shallow. But I know better. I know that things are what we make of them. Practicing what we preach has its challenges. We must ask ourselves what we really want and how what we do may align with our true hopes. What I really want is to utilize my life experience as a perseverant creative to share my cares and my belief in the spirit of raw expression beyond superficial beauty. I care to inspire cognizant compassion and elucidate hopeful possibilities. I care to dispel fear surrounding the entertainment of diverse perceptions. I care to explore the creativity of the human spirit and its applications, including beliefs behind human interactions with nature and one another over the rise and fall of civilizations and into the future of our making. So what's wrong with that? Here's one way to look at it. If you ask an innocent child, what would the world look like? What comes to mind? What would they do if they were all of a sudden their own good little boss and made all their own rules? You might hear seemingly silly, inconsequential things like breakfast for dinner, ice cream in the rain, or you may hear more industrious things like building a fort in the kitchen, or better, camping out in the backyard, or better yet, turning the whole place into a zoo, an animal sanctuary. Then, if you ask that child, once developed into a well-adjusted entrepreneurial mind, about the advantages they see in being their own boss, you may hear things like greater flexibility to prioritize time for family and hobbies. You may hear of aspirations regarding fitness and the appreciation of nature, innovation, community engagement, or even charity work. Philanthropy. This notion of people tapping into their primal spirit to live their own best life is so hopeful and inspiring. So what's the conflict? Well, it is difficult to evade the brush of disillusionment against the aura to think of the images that others may think of when posed with this simple question of what comes to mind when they think of anarchy. Now, some may not be aware that the prefix "an" may be thought of as without, and archy may be considered rule, and that in the olden days this may have implied without rule imposed, usually by a dictator of sorts. Some may also not be aware that philosophically, anarchy may be opined upon not as anti-rule, but as more of the possibilities of fostering self-regulation and self-management through empathetic introspection as a means to an organic and sustainable peaceful civility. To turn on the news, one might think that we're doomed, like world conflict and even the planet is exploding all around us, like everyone's lost their mind, and those seemingly unshaken appear rather disingenuous. These divergent perceptions may go back to what I think of as the monster under the bed. Imagine the typical child settling down to sleep with the activities of the day and maybe more visions of fun left to be had still rushing through their energetic little bodies as their closing eyes adjust to the darkness, their ears to the quiet, and all of their senses to the gravity pulling them downward, away from the day, down into their little nest. And they become certain that there is something to prevent or excuse them from submitting to sleep washing over them and carrying them away to dream, an odd noise, a shadow, a presence. And their wild little imaginations start to fill in the contours of the newly uncertain sounds and shapes. The normal healthy child, just old enough to have the self-awareness to not just fall asleep wherever they collapse after running across the room like a toddler, may attribute this bridge between conscious and unconscious worlds to a portal where the most playful daydreams of princesses and pirates may become nightmares without the proper reassurance. Imagine the child who lives in their playful world of toys and make-believe throughout the day, and they use the limited tools of language at their disposal to characterize these concerns regarding their restlessness in a child's logic as a monster, and then the request for reassurance is disregarded. They are told there are no monsters, and their overwhelming sense that their genuine apprehension is deemed ridiculous does not mitigate any fear, but rather summons another monster, that of self-doubt. And so, as they fall asleep under a blanket of emotions too heavy for their innocence, they try to ignore their senses. But it is too much, so they cry out again and again until they are flatly told to stop making up stories. But without knowing what else to believe, they clutch their blanket of worries until they fall asleep tense with the images of monsters pervading their dreams. Now imagine the child whose assertions that there is a monster is met with the reassurance that our silly make-believe monsters are just for pretend, and real monsters are just people who do really bad things, or keep choosing to make bad choices, and that there are no monsters here because we try to be good, right? Right, tickle, tickle. And then they are shown that the closet is monster-free and fastened tightly, and that there is nothing under the bed, and that the sound at the window, if you listen, actually sounds like a beautiful lullaby of the wind. And maybe that's why they call it a window, ha ha ha. And the child is assured that our senses are good, that our senses are a blessing when we use them to understand the world around us, like distinguishing the lullaby of the wind from something dangerous. So then, when this child attempts to go back to sleep, they feel enveloped in their blanket of reassurance and confidence, until they hear something once again. This time, they try to muster the use of their little senses, but they are sure it isn't the closet door, and it isn't the wind. There really is something under the bed. Like a normal child, they jerk their blanket up over their head and remember what they were told. With their eyes closed, they try to imagine the room of the daytime. They may even get super creative and call upon their dolls or their play monsters to defend them as they push away encroaching images of uncertainty. And they go over what it could actually be that is disturbing their peaceful transition to dream. They listen intently, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. The child listened and actually heard like they'd never heard before. There was a distinct scritch and a faint crackle, then a bigger scratch, and then a light thud. What kind of a monster could this be? But before the child formulated the thought, they saw their own image. They remembered putting a wrapper in their pocket at snack time that day, then forgetting to throw it away. And it must have just fallen out of their pocket. And the images, not of a monster, but of discernment, came flooding through the child's growing mind. The scratch and the small thump, I got it, the child thought. Here, kitty, kitty. The child didn't even flinch in the darkness when the cat came to the call. And when the caregiver heard the child out of bed and went to inquire, the child snuggled up with the cat, assured the caregiver not to worry. They just had to get up and get the wrapper out from under the bed that the cat must have found, and then they threw it away. And this child added, no monsters here, 'cause we know how to listen, and we all try to do the right thing. Okay, so I'll let you draw your own inferences from how this relates back to disparities in people's attitudes about freedom. As I move into the second third of my month-long video a day challenge, I felt like doing a little check-in on all of my trials and tribulations, but I'm learning to embrace dynamicism, and this is just what came to me this morning. So in the spirit of experimentation and trusting in the creative process, practicing what I preach, I went with the flow. I care to share hopeful and inspiring themes, even if in rough form and as time permits. And ultimately, I hope that this glimpse into my creative process finds you well and in your own nurturing and creative spirits.